A structure dated to 11,600 years ago, 6,000 years before the construction of Stonehenge and the Great Pyramid of Giza. Gobekli Tepe is believed to have been intentionally buried for the future and is now barely being excavated. Who built it and why? Why aren't we digging it up? Today, join me while I answer all of these questions and more secrets behind the oldest dated human structure on Earth. Göbekli Tepe is an archaeological discovery situated in Turkey, and more specifically in the southeast of this country. It is situated on the limestone plateau with around it the Taurus Mountains, the Heron Plain, and the Balik River. The site itself is elevated on what is called a tell, or a human-made mound. The site was first discovered in 1963 by a team from the Istanbul and Chicago University. They noticed fragments of flint tools, but they just thought it was another Byzantine cemetery, so no major excavation was initiated. It wasn't until 1994 when it was rediscovered by Klaus Schmidt, a German archaeologist. He realized that it was a monumental structure, much, much older than anything previously known. Now, you might be asking, what exactly did he discover? Well, we now know, thanks to ground-penetrating radar, that the entire site extends to around 22 acres, or 90 soccer fields. Göbekli Tepe is divided in 20 known circular enclosures ranging from 10 to 30 meters in diameter, or 32 to 100 feet. What Klaus Schmidt discovered inside this site intrigued him greatly. In an article entitled Göbekli Tepe, Southeastern Turkey, a preliminary report on the 1995-1999 excavation, he says, and I quote, "It was not only the size nor its unusual topographical settings that made Göbekli Tepe outstanding compared to other Neolithic sites. The limestone slabs and pillar fragments, and even large-scale sculptures found on the surface during the first visits lay all over the mound, indicating that the entire area had been used for construction of megalithic architecture, not just a specific part of it." Yes, you heard that correctly. Limestone slabs. Today, again using ground-penetrating radar, we know that there are approximately 200 of these T-shaped slabs spread throughout the 20 enclosures. Some of these slabs weigh up to 50 metric tons, or 55 US tons. But the real mystery with these T-shaped slabs are the hieroglyph-like symbols on multiple of them. These are not your typical hieroglyphs that are made with paint or just carved out of the stone. If you look closely, you can notice that these hieroglyphs are sticking out of the slab, which means that the whole slab was perfectly and precisely carved into the stone. And let me remind you, this structure is also dated to 6,000 years before the invention of the wheel. A lot of these carvings are of animals. If we take a deeper dive into the actual structure of Göbekli Tepe, 10 out of the probable 20 enclosures have been dug up. The four most impressive are enclosures A, B, C, and D. They are cut into the limestone bedrock and lined with smaller stones. And of course, in the middle, we see those massive T-shaped pillars. It has also been accurately observed that it is the older enclosures that are the biggest and most intricate. But apart from all of this, the thing that makes Göbekli Tepe even more mysterious
is that it was intentionally buried.
All this has many people throwing out wild theories, some kind of crazy, but some a little more interesting. Before we get to that, let's see what the mainstream thinks happened. They say that the monument was built during an age called the Pre-Pottery Neolithic A, from 9,600 to 8,800 BCE, and was inhabited until the Pre-Pottery Neolithic B period, 8,800 and 7,000 BCE. The pre-pottery Neolithic A humans were the first to start the transition from hunter-gatherers to nomad farmers, but it seemed that at the beginning of the construction of Göbekli Tepe, the builders were still hunter-gatherers, but lived in villages and supplemented their diet with cereals. The mainstream says that over the span of 1,500 years, these hunter-gatherers built all of Göbekli Tepe for religious ceremonies. But one thing they don't answer is why. Why did they have such a massive and monumental structure? Have you ever heard of other hunter-gatherers doing such a thing? It's crazy. One article from the John Templeton Foundation had this to say. The site is so old humans hadn't yet developed pottery or domesticated any plants or animals for food. For the artists working at Gobekli Tepe, the only tools available for carving the massive limestone monoliths were other stones. To complete such monumental works of architecture required an almost unfathomable amount of work, the prehistoric equivalent of digging a tunnel with spoons. Furthermore, the amount of skill and preparation that would be necessary to dig up the T-shaped slabs and then carve them, in my opinion, and in opinion of many others, would be crazy for simple hunter-gatherers to accomplish. So multiple questions arise. Firstly, what was their motivation? And secondly, how did they do it? Maybe this civilization was trying to tell us something, trying to send us a message. Then another question arrives, is this correct? What are they trying to tell us? The most logical thing would be to send a warning of some kind. But a warning of what? Well, if you saw my last video, you would know that the dates 11,600 years ago is actually the end of a time of great floods, coolings, and where half of the megafauna on Earth died. Many think that this was caused by hundreds of comets blasting on the Earth and in its atmosphere. Could Gobekli Tepe be a time capsule warning us about our possible death in the near future? Graham Hancock is one of the staunch defenders and the person who popularized this idea in his book Magicians of the God and in his Netflix series Lost Civilization. But I was able to find a great article titled Decoding Gobekli Tepe with Archaeoastronomy, What Does the Fox Say? By Martin B. Switman and Dimitrios Chakritsis, published in July 28, 2023. I highly recommend anyone watching read it, for much of the next part is backed up by their research. Now, we must all take into account that this is just one paper, but from what I've read, most of it is backed up with good reason and evidence. Plus, this is not just some internet theory, it's a scientific paper. So, to get back to the topic, what we have established for potential reasons for the structure is a warning, or an account of what happened long ago. The paper also suggests that Gobekli Tepe was a place the builders went to study the night sky. Okay, this is some pretty good theories. Now let's put ourselves into their hypothetical situation. How would you communicate to a far away future civilization? Well, the first thing you might want to do is give a date of this happening. You couldn't write in English, for they would not understand. Our numbers would also have no meaning to us, even if they seem so understandable to us. Even our current dating system might have no meaning to them. This is actually a question that scientists are trying to answer in regard to nuclear waste. One way to give a precise dating is using constellations. This is because Earth's axial precession. Or to explain a little better, the Earth has a slow wobble in its rotational cycle around the Sun that takes about 26,000 years. This has the effect of changing the positions of the constellation and gives us the ability to date the night sky. Now, did the ancients know that this was a 26,000-year cycle? Probably not. But did they know the constellations moved over hundreds of years? Well, I think so. Just remember, this is a time where every single night you go to sleep looking at the stars for tens or hundreds of thousands of years over generations and generations. Plus, what is a very common description of a constellation? Well, yes, of course, animals. And what do we find all over Göbekli Tepe? Animal carvings. Now, this article focuses on one of the most famous of the T-shaped pillars, Pillar 43 in Enclosure D. To start, we have to describe what we see on this pillar. All the way at the bottom and on the right, we see what seems to be a headless primate or even a human. To the left, we see our first bird with a long neck and a head facing towards the left. Left again of this, we see the head and feet of a dog or wolf, and above a snake. To the right, we see a perfect carving of a scorpion. Now, on the second block above, on the right, we also see a magnificent image of some sort of bird, with its two wings out, one nearly parallel, one perpendicular. On the right, we see some sort of long bird, like a crane or a flamingo, forming a sort of right angle. To its right, a snake or fish with a large head. On the far right, we see what seems to be an H or an I. Below this, we see a squat-like bird shape. In the middle of all of this is a circle. The paper calls all this part of the stone the timestamp. Above it are a bunch of squares and V's, who many think are another sort of dates. And above this, we see 3 handbags, or what we believe to be handbags, with each a little animal next to it. The leftmost one seems to be a bent-over bird, the middle a sort of quadruped, and the last a sort of crawling quadruped like a frog. Now that we have described the pillar in its entirety, we get to the somewhat complex parts, but it also is the most interesting. The article starts with the scorpion image, which is still today the representation of the well-known symbol for Scorpius. And so they say that this was the first time they mustered the possibility that the animals on the whole pillar were actually constellations. But they also remind us that this is just a theory and that symbols could always be mythology or hunting. One more thing to know is you might be asking if the stars on their own move too over thousands of years. The answer is yes, but it takes hundreds of thousands of years, so it is not the most apparent over the span of 10,000 years. In the article, and using an app called Stellarium, they generated a picture of the night sky at 10,950 BC, September 11th. Don't ask me why they chose that date, I have no clue. It might have to do with the Younger Dryas exact dates. But anyways, if you look at the picture and the pillar side by side with the scorpion and the constellation Scorpius, both in the middle, you see some similarities. First of all, probably the second best carved animal on the pillar is the vulture or eagle on the top left. This coincides pretty much exactly with the constellation Sagittarius. We can tell by, first of all, the placement, but also the 2 sorts of branches that go out at pretty much the same angle as the vulture's wings. They then say that the symbol on the pillar of the sort of 90-degree flamingo and the downward snake could be a representation of our constellation Ophiuchus. Now, I know what you're probably saying, it doesn't look right, but the paper says it might just have to do with the lack of space on the pillar. Okay, so moving on now. The goose or duck on the bottom left, they say match up to our constellation Libra, and I agree. They have this to say about Libra. And indeed, Libra can be viewed as a swimming or floating bird, with upright neck and upturned tail. Moreover, the view of Libra as a swimming long-necked bird is probably more intuitive than our current symbol for Libra, the scales. One could argue that the form of the carving of the long-necked bird does not precisely fit the Libra constellation, in terms of the position, of course, on these stars. However, the symbol remains partly obscured, and moreover, it is possible the artists of Pillar 43 did not intend to depict an accurate star map of the sky. Rather, their intention was perhaps to provide a symbolic representation of the order and approximate placements of the constellations as they saw it, sufficient to enable the interpretation of Pillar 43. So moving on. They now examine the dog or wolf-shaped symbol on the right of the goose. And what do you know? At basically the same spot on the map is Lupus, our constellation of the wolf. After all this, I think you have to agree with me that there is no saying that this is a French theory. But it gets better. The paper now identifies this circle in the middle of our pillars as the sun. Pretty logical. If this is true, this confirms that the pillar is communicating a date and not just a bunch of random animals or even random constellations. Now, they go on to say that based on their observation, this pillar could correspond to 4 different dates at the different solstice or equinox. Either 2000 AD winter solstice, 4350 BC autumn equinox, 10,950 BC summer solstice, or 18,000 BC spring equinox. We can directly eliminate the first one and the second because the civilization didn't exist at these times, and the last one, 18,000 BC, is just too far from the carbon datings that we have. So that leaves 10,950 BC on the summer solstice. And guess what? When the uncertainty in this date estimate is taken into account, it is in very good agreement with the date of the proposed Younger Dryas event at 10,890 BC. So everything matches up pretty tightly, but there's more we didn't talk about. Those 3 handbags with the little animal symbols next to them. The question stands, are they handbags? Just look at them. What do you think they could be? To be honest, I don't know if you will be able to see. I certainly didn't. But the paper suggests that these might actually be sunsets. Do you see it now? What we thought might have been the pouch of the handbag is the land, and the loop is the sun. So, we know that the hieroglyphs are supposedly based on the summer solstice of the year 10,950 BC. If we take each preceding equinox and solstice, which is the spring equinox of 10,950 BC, then the winter solstice of 10,950 BC, and finally the autumn equinox of 10,951 BC, then, using Solarium, we get the corresponding zodiac signs of each of them. By the way, the zodiac sign of a equinox is just a constellation right above the setting sun. We get the following. Spring equinox of 10,950 BC, Virgo. Winter solstice of 10,950 BC, Gemini. And autumn equinox of 10,951 BC, Pisces. Now, if we take a look at these 3 constellations and just simply describe them, well, by me, I mean the paper, they describe Virgo as a downward crawling 4-legged creature, like a frog, which, to be honest, is pretty good. You can see the 2 long back legs, the body, and then just a last star as the head. Gemini as a standing quadruped, like an ibex, which I have to be honest, I had to look up what it was. But it was this beast, and in my opinion, it looks awesome. Okay, but back to constellations. You can also see the body and the 2 horns, and the last one, Pisces, is said to look like some sort of angled creature, which I don't know about the creature part, but it's certainly angled. And so, with this, if we take a look at these 3 handbags again, and start from the left, we can see that the sort of bending bird does coincide with Pisces, even if the orientation is a little off. The second fits the description perfectly, and the third also. And so, with all of this, they made a calculation of what the probability that it is entirely coincidence that these patterns match each other, taking into account that some might be abstractions rather than one-to-one patterns, matches. And given that they have been placed in approximately the correct spatial locations. So with that, they made a calculation, which I won't bore you with, but I will put on the screen if anyone wants to read it. It starts at the appendix. And so, in the end, their statistical analysis says that probability that the arrangements of those animals in that way was a coincidence is 1 in, wait for it, 5 million, which is crazy. They also calculated the probability that the Pillar 43 was an exact date stamp for the Younger Dryas event, which came to be 8%. And you might think that's kind of low, but we are talking about an exact and perfect date stamp. So it is pretty high. And so with this, they finished by saying that the human without a head at the bottom of the pillar represents the worst day of human history, i.e., the hypothetical Younger Dryas event. Watch my video to learn more about it. They go on to try to interpret more symbols, but even in their words, it's rather speculative at this point. Well, that was pretty crazy, but it also filled a lot of gaps about the questions we had. If the theory is true, we now know why they spent so much time and effort into making this. To recap, according to the theory, the people who built Gobekli Tepe, or their ancestors, witnessed a catastrophic event never seen before, and so, because of this, and in an attempt to warn future generations to prepare, they built this massive structure, and using constellations they created a date stamp of this event. To top it all off, they buried it so that it would not be destroyed and would only be opened when the time was right, so that we may uncover the truth. Now, we must remember that this is just one paper, and there is at least one paper refuting this hypothesis, saying that the writers of this theory purposely chose specific carvings to prove their hypothesis, which is a worthy critique in a way, but it doesn't address the real discovery that was presented. It also says that a lot of their work relies on speculation instead of hard evidence. Now, I haven't read the whole rebuttal, and I encourage others to read it. It's called More Than a Vulture, a response to Sweatman and Criticis. Now, one of the reasons that you could say there isn't much information and evidence is because there is basically no more excavation happening. Now, you might be like, there's no way, that would make no sense. This is literally the most important archaeology site on Earth, and I would agree with you, it probably is. But it is happening. Using ground-penetrating radar, we learned that we have only uncovered 5% of Gobekli Tepe. The worst part is that we were already at 5% in 2008. In 2017, it was still reported to be at 5%. But to understand it better, here's a clip from the YouTuber Bright Insight, who breaks it all down.
This got me recently wondering if that 5 percentile excavation figure had improved in the 7 years since. So I took it upon myself to do some inquiring as to what advances of excavations have occurred at this site in the last several years since that 5% figure received international attention. And I was stunned to learn that it had not changed at all in the years between 2017 and 2021, as reported by the WorldHeritageFund.org. However, 2021 is 3 years ago now, so I searched further and found a 2023 article that included a quote by a professional guide that works at Gobekli Tepe, and she stated that the estimate was still only at 5%.
Now you might be saying, no, they don't want to stop the digging, they just don't have any money or resources. Well, the problem with that is that the heads of the project have literally said that they, and I quote, want to save it for future generations. Well, now we know that they clearly have stopped or at least drastically reduced the excavations, but that's not all. If you take a closer look at the photos of Gobekli Tepe, you see that there are concrete walkways and a massive roof over the whole thing. The roof was supposedly built to protect the uncovered ruins from rain and snow and wind, which it actually doesn't if you look at these photos. But you can also see in some photos that the pillars of the thing are built on the actual monuments. Like, it can't be more obvious than this. But it gets worse. As you can see from this before and after shot, they have planted trees on the actual mounds. And tree roots are notorious for destroying ruins. What was their argument? They say it added value to the property. But in my humble opinion, I don't think a bunch of olive trees are going to add value to the biggest, oldest, and most mysterious monuments ever found. If we dig deeper, though, we realize that it is actually banned to cut down olive trees in Turkey. Banned, I say. It seems pretty obvious now that they do not want to uncover the totality of Göbekli Tepe. But who is they? Well, they is the Dogus group. Now, you might not know this group, and I didn't either before this, but they are one of the biggest private groups in Turkey. But that isn't the important part. What is important is that the chairman of the company, CEO, and the chief executive, Fritz Sahenk and Husnu Akhan, are both active members of, wait for it, the WEF, or World Economic Forum. But that's not it. Özlem Denizmen, the head of strategy at Dogus Holding, was recognized as a young global leader by the WEF in 2011. Additionally, in 2016, when the Dogus Group launched a 20-year partnership to support Göbekli Tepe, this initiative was globally announced at the WEF annual meeting in Davos, Switzerland, with a literal ice sculpture of Göbekli Tepe in front. If you don't already know what the WEF is, there are plenty of YouTube videos on it, and I highly suggest you go look it up. After this partnership, they have constructed, as I said before, 900 meters of walkways, but also roads. The wife of Klaus Schmidt, I'm not going to try to pronounce this name, was an archaeologist herself. She went to visit the site after her husband's death and said, and I quote, "They're doing everything in a rush that Klaus didn't want, as he knew it will destroy Göbekli Tepe. I cannot explain the extent of the destruction which I saw as I visited Göbekli Tepe this morning." Now only one question remains. Why? Well, there are two answers to this question, one more disturbing than the other. The first is that they just want to make this a tourist spot and make money from it, which on the surface seems pretty logical, kind of like the Great Pyramids. But then you start asking, why make concrete roads? To make tourism easier? Okay. But why plant trees stopping excavations? And by the way, if you excavated more, maybe you would find something that would make it more famous than the pyramids. And then you could make much more money. No, I think they don't want to excavate. For what reasons? Well, one we have not gotten into is the possibility that this site has biblical significance. But just simply, maybe a discovery in this monument would make us have to rewrite our whole history as we know it. This would bring other things into question, and I believe they do not want this. But that's just me. Hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, leave a like and subscribe. Next video will probably be dropping during May about either Ponzi schemes, which I find quite fascinating in the historical sense, or Edward Bernays and his ties to US propaganda. Take care.